What we're going to do today is we're going to go through and do what we call the administrative training portion of the Altigen phone system. Now, what I have over here that you're seeing on the screen is just our console and remotely connected to the Altigen phone system. And in this case, we're running version 6.7. However, it's very similar with 6.7, 6.5, version 7. So this will effectively be the same for all of those versions. So the first thing that we did was we clicked on, let's just review that, Start and MaxAdministrator. This will be the administrative console that we're going to log into. Some of you may have this option installed on your local desktop, so you may not need to remotely connect to the server. However, if not, you can connect to the server, and one of our Baroan engineers will be able to make sure that that's set up for you the way that you would like to work. So this particular application can absolutely be installed on your desktop, which then removes the need for you to get this installed or have a remote access to the server only. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on that application, and then the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to ask us which server do we want to connect to. Now, if we only have one server that you're working with, one phone server in the office, then you would just select the one that comes up because it's the only one in the list. If, however, you have an organization where you have multiple servers with this one application, you can select on the drop-down and you can connect to multiple locations to manage different servers from this one application. We'll click on OK. It will then start the Altigen administration program for us. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to see a few screens that are set up here, and what we're going to do is we're going to just log in. So there's two ways. There are some fast, quick icons that you can click on here, and when you log in, these will all become available. Right now they're unavailable. The other option you have is from the menu options at the top. You can select Login here. As you can see, nothing else is available until you log in. And this is to protect the phone system from having somebody make changes without really knowing what they're doing. And while that is very easy to do, modifying any of the changes in the phone system can change the behavior of the system. This is a very powerful phone system with a lot of functions, and so it's very easy to modify one thing and it'll take effect and it may not function the way you'd like it to. So the first thing we'll do is we'll click Services, Login, or we can click Login here, same thing. It will prompt us for a password. The password that we're going to put in is the one that was assigned to your system. The default password for Altigen is the number 2 5 times. So if you were not assigned a password, it would be the number 2 5 times, and then you can change it to whatever you want it to be. Okay, let's log in here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm the type of person that likes to have everything nice and neat. So if I go to View and I click on Align Windows, it will modify all the windows to fit my screen. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to give you an overview of all of the capabilities within the Altigen administration module. And after going through this, you will have a very good idea of what is possible with the system. So when we're looking at this, this just gives us a point in time view of exactly what's going on. So up here we have the extension view. This on the left-hand side is the list of all the extensions. The green lights indicate that the phone is online, but no one is on the phone. And the red light means that somebody is connected and using the phone. As you can see, I'm on the phone right now, and it will show who I'm connected to. We also have another person that is on the phone right now with this meeting, and that person as well is showing up as far as who they're connected to. On the middle side here, just to the right of this extension view, so you can see exactly what's going on, when you open up the Altigen administration module, if you keep this open, it will log any calls that are going on in the system will start showing up here from the time that you've opened this module up. So right now we just opened it up, so there are no call logs in the view. However, anyone within your organization that is making or receiving a call will show up here so that you can view it. Down over here underneath that we have what's called the trunk view. And the trunk view is what allows us to see what's going on with the actual phone lines that are connected to the phone system. And what you see here is you have LS. These are loop start. So what this is showing us the options that we have to connect with analog lines to our phone system. However, we only have 2 analog lines that are connected to our phone system, and that's truly just for backup in the event that our main PRI line goes down. And so loop start is what LS stands for, and that's an analog line, and it shows the status that these lines are not being used. The other LS lines are showing red because we don't actually have a physical line connected to them, and so we mark them out of service, so they're not connected. If we did decide to get additional lines and hook them up to the phone system and they were analog lines, then we would connect them, and then this would change the status, the red on the left, and the status showing that it would be idle. If for any reason there was a problem with the line, it would show an error on the line or a red light. Underneath here we have what's called a PRI line. PRI line is simply a T1 line that we have that's connected to our phone system, and it allows, one line allows us to have 23 channels to make calls over. And so you'll see PRI and idle. Of the 23 channels that we have, only 2 of them are connected. And if you could see, I'm taking up channel 7 in here in the PRI, and Susan, extension 109, is taking up channel 8 of the PRI line. So you could see who's taking up lines within the system. The reason that they do this is it's also good to troubleshoot. For instance, if you have any issues with a particular line, maybe somebody's complaining about static on a line or something like that, by viewing this you can actually see which line the people are on, and maybe it has to be a particular channel or a line that is problematic, and so it may not happen all the time, but when it does, this will allow you to see which line is actually causing that. And on the right-hand side of the board, what this is showing us here is the types of boards that we have in the system and the ID for the boards. So this is not anything that you really have to worry about or look at any particular time. The majority of the time, if you do open this up, you will be viewing what's happening here with the extensions and what's happening here with the lines. So what we'll do to start our training is we're going to go through and just look at the System tab, the System menu. And when we look at the System menu, we have different menu options. We have a PBX menu with different options. We have Call Center. If you do happen to have the Call Center functionality enabled, this will be a location that you go into. The majority of the time that we spend will be within the System and the PBX menu items. So let's just dig right in and jump in and get started. So if we look at System and the System menu and System configuration, what we see here is we are seeing all the different options that we can access within the Altigen system. So let's take a look. Under the General tab, this is a System ID format, the System ID location. And the System ID is really used for if you have more than one phone system, you assign a different ID for them so that you can connect, as we mentioned before, multiple systems together and allow extensions to have 4-digit dialing or 3-digit dialing direct to each other. And the System ID is just how it identifies it so there's no overlap. The Manager's Extension field, essentially what this is when you are a manager, you have some additional capabilities. And within the Manager extension, you can pick anyone that is already an extension on the phone system. What this means is that whoever is assigned as the manager's extension has the capability to go in and record additional phrases for the system globally. The manager is also someone that can run reports on all of the calls that are going on. So if you wanted to pick up some calls, some specific statistics about how many calls an individual is doing based on an extension, or you wanted to see overall reports regarding the volume that you're doing within the day during a regular workday, what are the peaks and valleys within the number of calls that you're getting, the only person that can really run those reports would be the manager. So the manager's extension would be one person that you would pick to be able to run those, or if you wanted multiple people to pick those, if you created what's called a hunt group, which we'll go through in a little bit, you will be able to add multiple extensions and select the hunt group as the manager's extension, and that would give all the people within the hunt group the capability to run those reports. The system home area code field is where we put in the area code for the phone system, and then the main number system, the system main phone number. So this is where you would put this in, and this really has a lot to do with the caller ID. So if there's no caller ID at the extension level, you do have the capability to push out caller ID with the system. You can put in the caller ID here, and if you are set up to push out the digits with caller ID from your telephone provider, this is where it would get that phone number, and it would allow the phone system to present your phone number that you have listed here as the caller ID. Underneath here, we have what's called PRI calling number, and what it's asking is we put a check mark, send initiator's ID in ONA, which stands for one number access, and forward calls. So essentially what this is asking is the system, as we mentioned, has the capability, has a lot of great features. One of them is something called one number access, which we'll cover later when we talk about extensions, and also to forward calls when you're not in the office and you'd like somebody to have their calls that are coming to your extension forward to your cell phone or your home phone. So by enabling this check mark, what this is doing is when the call is being forwarded to your remote location, whether it's the mobile device or your home extension or your home phone, the caller ID that's going to be presented on that call that's dialing you will be the person that's calling into the phone system. So rather than it being the phone system here in our office that is creating the call, it will grab the caller IDs, the phone number, and it will present that information when it is calling you. So when you see the call coming in, it'll be that person's call rather than the phone system here at the office. So it's a simple check on, check off, whether that is enabled or not. Underneath here, we have what we call the operator, and it's asking to select an extension or group as the operator. When we get to the part with what's called auto attendant, a lot of the options that we have an operator as a defined call flow. For instance, you'll have the option to select if no one picks up the phone, forward the call to the operator. In this particular case, you define who the operator is. Now, the operator could be a single extension, or the operator could be a hunt group or a work group that has multiple people, and then you can set the ring priorities within those hunt group and work groups, as I'll show you in a little bit when we get to that section. But that could be a specific order that is dialing the individuals, or it could be ringing all the phones at the same time when somebody is dialing for an operator, whether they press a 0 or we just select that that is what happens if nobody's picking up. Call supervision, under here, the check mark is enabled, and it says allow supervisor to monitor, barge in, coach, and record agents' non-work group call. So if you have the call center functionality enabled, and that is an option that you can have, and it does provide very, very robust call center capabilities. By enabling this, you have someone who's designated as a supervisor, and the supervisor has the capability to listen in on the calls, barge in if they don't believe that what the agent is talking to the people about is accurate and they want to change something, or coach, which means that the supervisor can talk to the agent and the agent can hear the supervisor, but the customer that's on the phone would not be able to hear what the supervisor is telling the agent on the phone. As well as the supervisor can record an agent's non-work group call, meaning that you could limit the capability that the supervisor has to manage that agent by only allowing them to work within a work group that that supervisor is in charge of, rather than any call that that agent is on. And so again, there's just a simple check on, check off in order to enable these very powerful capabilities. Over here on the right-hand side, we have the country. And so we're in the USA and Canada. However, if you had the system in a different country, you would be able to do that. And then there are different phone rules that would take effect. So underneath distinctive ring, we have 3 different check marks, and this is where you enable how the system would function for you. So for instance, if we have enabled in our phone system, enabled distinctive ring. And what that means is that when a call comes in from an outside line, it will be 3 rings. It will be a regular ring, one long ring that would just be as if it's a regular call. However, if an extension was to call another extension, it would be 2 rings that would happen. And this way you know that just by listening to the call, the ring type, you would be able to know that it's somebody on the inside of the office or somebody from the outside of the office. The other one right underneath it is called Enable Operator Call Priority Ringing. If the operator is calling, same idea as above, that it would be a distinctive call. And essentially, it's one long ring that doesn't stop until you pick up the priority call from the operator. And this way, you can, just by listening, know who it is that's contacting you. The third option, Enable Workgroup Call Priority Ringing, kind of is the same as the above. If you do have work groups in place and the work group is calling a particular person, or the people are within a work group, it would be a distinctive ringing than the normal regular ring from the outside. Underneath here, we have what's called the conference bridge option. When we have this enabled, we have this enabled to say, end the conference if no extensions are participating. So we normally recommend this to be in place. And essentially what it means is that if I have no one on the inside or no one that is an extension on the phone system participating in any of the conference calls that are initiated by the phone system, then the conference must end. There are some people in some companies where we've been requested that they initiate a conference call and then they can hang up and they want the conference call to continue taking place on their lines. And so if that was the type of option that you would like to have enabled, all you would need to do is uncheck this, and then the conference call would not end if no one is participating internally. System call park. In the system call park area, if someone was to call in, this is more system call park. Let's just talk about that for a minute. You have the option when someone calls in to put what's called park, to park a call so that someone can pick them up anywhere else in the organization. Let's say you have a big warehouse, and rather than transferring the call, you would not just transfer, you'd put them on hold, or you would park them. This would allow someone somewhere else in the warehouse to pick up that call that is now parked. And so what this is doing is it's indicating a timeout ring. So let's say a call comes in and somebody was to park the call, and then they'd use the overhead paging, or they'd page through the phones, and they would say, Paul, you have a call on parked line 001. What would happen is Paul would then go over to the phone and he would dial the park pickup and then 001 so that he can get that number, that call, and then he would be able to connect to that phone call. However, if that person does not pick up within a certain amount of time, and this is where you specify what that certain amount of time is, then the call will come back to whoever it was that placed the call in park. And this is where you would specify if the person does not pick up the call when they are in park, by a certain amount of time, that call would come back to whoever placed the call to, so they could try to find them, or they could do something else, send them the voicemail or whatever it might be. And so basically, this is where you specify that time frame. And play greeting phrase. So immediately while they're getting placed in park, there would be a phrase, and it could be thank you for holding, or it could be something related to the company. It could be an advertisement. And this would be a phrase that you can record. And as we mentioned before, this phrase would be recorded by whoever is assigned as a manager's extension, and that would be how the people that are parked would get heard. Let's go over to number plan. So in the number plan tab, we have the option here, and this is only in the beginning before you create extensions, to develop the system overall extension rules. So how many extensions should the system be? Is it 3-digit, 4-digit, 5-digit? You decide, and this is where you put in. In our case, we have 3-digit extensions. You may want to have 4-digit or 5-digit or 6-digit. It's up to you, or even more than that. The default password is the password that, by default, when anyone gets an extension created, that will be the password that they will have assigned, and the moment that they log into their voicemail, that password will expire, and it will ask them to put in another password that would be used for them to access their voicemail. DID number length, this is just the amount of digits that if we were to assign direct inward dial format lines from the phone company that we can assign as direct rings to an extension. In this case, we could say it's 3-digit or 4-digit. And then we have the option to enable dial digit translator. So if we enabled this and we click setup, this would allow us to specify what would happen with someone if they're just dialing numbers. So we never really used this feature, but it is something that you can look at and enable, and it will try to translate what you're trying to do. Under it here, where it says first digit assignment, this is where you really assign what can your phone system do with these numbers. What are they for? So if you could see, if somebody picks up the phone and pressed the star key, what it would happen is it would be invalid. So if they picked it up and no one was on the phone and they pressed that star key, they would hear the fast busy. If you wanted to, you can make that a trunk access, meaning it could grab an outside line. You could send them to a specific feature. It could be to the operator. You decide what that digit, when somebody presses it, does. Same thing with all of these other numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on our system means that it is going to go to an extension. And so if anybody picks up and dials any of those numbers, it will be going to an extension. And if you specify these numbers, then you cannot have any extensions that start, as you can see, 7, 8, and 9 are not for extensions. You cannot have extensions that start with 7, 8, or 9 if this is what we're going to be specifying that these numbers do. But anything that we want from an extension perspective, it could be it could start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So in this particular case, what we do here is we have 7, 8, and 9, and number 7 is what we call trunk access. Trunk access means that we have the capability, if we look over here, we have the capability on the trunk view to make some of these lines, these trunks, as we call them, available when somebody dials 7. So when somebody dials 7, we're saying pick a particular trunk, and then we can assign that within the trunk view, which I'll show you in a few seconds. Number 8 is route access. The phone system is extremely powerful and allows us the capability to add logic to the system. So for instance, if we say that we want the phone calls to go over a specific phone number, we can have what's called a route access. Let me just show you what I'm talking about. So if we go to PBX, outcall routing, we have a few different types of lines that we're able to work with. We have analog lines. When we click on analog, we had 4 lines in here that were configured, but as you saw before, we only have 2 that were online. Let me just show you that again. So if we go here and we look at the analog lines, we see that 0 and 1 are live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these 2 because they're not part of the analog group. We're using these other 2 lines for something else. These are out of service. So we have those. We also have IP SIP trunks that are identified. And IP SIP trunks can be lines that are coming into your office through an internet provider. And this phone system is very powerful, so you can have analog lines, PRI digital lines, SIP internet lines as well. We have the PRI lines identified, so this is where we're grouping all 23 lines that are considered PRI, and that's what we labeled it. And then we have other SIP trunks that we have available, and then other SIP trunks. So we have multiple SIP trunks that we can enable into our phone system. Now, by identifying these different groups here, we can add either a header to the number if we wanted to insert digits whenever any of those are dialed, or if we wanted to delete any digits before any of those are dialed. And where that might come into play is some of the lines that are analog were called centrics, and they required 9 to be dialed by the phone company. Now, if you have a phone system and you're dialing 9 to get an outside line, that means you would have to dial 9 to get an outside line from your phone system, and then you'd have to dial 9 for the carrier in order to use one of their Centrex lines, and then you would dial the phone number. So rather than confusing individuals and saying dial 99 and then dial your phone number, you could simply insert a digit with the number 9 if you wanted to when anybody is ever using an analog line. Now, dialing pattern, what we have here is we can say if anyone is going to dial a particular pattern, whether it's local, long distance, international, we could have a priority that the phone system would then route the calls based on the priority. So for instance, if you have a special international rate with your SIP trunks, you could say when anyone sees when there's any kind of a 011 call that's being initiated, then automatically the priority goes to the SIP trunks in the number 1 route priority. And if that is not available, then go over the T1 PRI line. And then if that is not available, then go over the analog lines. That makes it possible for you to reduce the cost overall so that you're not spending so much money. The default routes is where we normally specify what happens with the lines and which group of lines get picked first. So this is kind of like a failover, but it's very straightforward, simple failover. So what do I mean by that? If your PRI line goes down, all 23 lines are then no longer available. So by looking at the default routes here, the system could say, okay, for any local calls, what I want to do is I want to start in all my calls, I want to go over the PRI line. If the PRI is not available, then I want to use the analog line. If the analog line is not available, I want to use the SIP trunks. Same thing with long distance, international, and emergency calling, which is 911. The reason we do this is if the PRI circuit goes down, we want the system to automatically pick a line that goes out over the analog line. And so this phone system, very capable, can have automatic failover from an internal perspective, meaning that if the PRI line goes down and you have this enabled, it will automatically know that the PRI lines are not available, they'll be out of service or unavailable, and then it will use whatever lines it has that are available. So any calls that are trying to be made to go out would go through, and any calls that are coming in, that would be something you would have to work with your phone provider to forward to the analog lines instead if you knew that you have an outage. And so that's something that we would be able to work with you and coordinate with your phone company. A lot of times the phone companies have an emergency service option that you can pick that says, hey, if you know that my PRI line is down, I want you to forward my main phone number over to the analog lines that are connected to my phone system. And so that's where this would get taken care of. If we look at the trunk access that we were talking about before, so if you remember, we were looking at system, configuration, number plan, trunk access. So if we look in here, trunk access code, when it says N means none, meaning that if anybody picks 8, number 8, it will look at the route and where we want it to go. But if we wanted to troubleshoot a particular line, somebody says to us, you know, I'm having some static issues on one of the lines. I can't really pinpoint which one it is. We would be able to come in here, click on an analog line, select trunk access as 7, and we would enable that. And now if we wanted to grab that line, we would be able to go to one of the phones, dial 7, and it would pick up this line. That is a very, very useful tool when we're troubleshooting any particular lines for any issues, because then we can isolate them when we're going through and we're making those calls. And so that's how we go to the number plan. That's how we get trunk access, route access, and then IP trunk access. IP trunk access is also available for us if somebody had another phone system, which we do. We have a disaster recovery option, and we have a second phone system at a data center, and if we wanted to make calls from that system, we would dial 9 and then dial our outside line, and that phone system would be available for us to use for outbound calling in the event all our lines were down here. Okay, let's continue along, and we'll go over to the Business Hours tab. Now, the Business Hours, this gives you the capability to have multiple companies set up with different business hours. And the reason that we have this is because you might have different departments in your company, or you might have different business hours. By default, you'll have a system one in here, but you can add as many as you'd like. When you have a check mark here during the day, it means that it's a work day. When you have no check marks in the day, it means that it's not a work day. You have AM schedules and PM schedules. Some companies have the system automatically at the end of the night go into a different mode for answering. And by defining your business hours for the office, this is where you determine what the system does during business hours, outside of business hours, meaning that it's a work day but it's past the closing time, and then non-work days, which is what is configured with not having a check mark. So you would specify your business hours in here, and then the system would take actions in the auto attendant and how it routes the calls based on that. The other nice feature that the phone system has is something called holiday. You have auto attendants and you have rules in place, but there are times when we might have a holiday and the company's closed, or there might be a snow day and people are not working in that day. And so you might want to have a different auto attendant for that. And so when this comes into play, what you want to do is you want to be able to add those dates. So we have a holiday, 2010 emergency snow day. Well, we haven't used this one, but we might have an auto attendant recording for it. So technically, you can create all of the holidays that your company is closed for the year, okay? And then what happens is when you select these days, on these days, it will look at what the rules are for this particular day rather than what's going on during that particular day. So, for instance, New Year's Day, we know when New Year's Day is, so we'll go to January 1st, 2014. That was this New Year's, so we'll go to 2015. So we'll set that up for next year. So January 1st, 2015, I want all incoming calls to route to our holiday auto attendant. 4th of July, I can select over here. So 4th of July this year, 2014, would be here. Okay, our company will be closed, and on that day, we're going to send all the calls to our closed hours auto attendant. Christmas, know when Christmas is going to be, 2014, December. So Christmas Day is Christmas on the 25th. Okay, so that is going to go over to our holiday greeting. And you can go in here and select the holidays ahead of time, or you can do them before you're going to have the holiday, and then this will take priority over the regular day's auto attendant. If you see here the profiles, they are with the system, fax lines, and different items that you have set up. Now, if we have a half of a day, for instance, if we have an early closing day, what you can do is you can say that it's going, you put a check mark to enable work hours during the holiday, and you could say from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. route calls to the open auto attendant, which means that from 8 to 3 we're going to be a normal day. However, from 3:01 p.m. to 5 p.m. we will be closed. And this could be because it's New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve, something along the lines of that, so that you can schedule your office to be closed after a certain amount of time. So this is a very powerful option here. System speed dials, if you wanted to add 60 speed dials, and these would be available for everyone in the company to utilize. If you have vendors or manufacturers or people that you dial on a regular basis, you can add system speed dials that are available to everyone, and you can have 60. Call restriction, this is where you can set the system up to protect yourself. For instance, no 900 number calling. You don't need any 900 calling being done. 976 numbers, 809, 284, 276, 876. These are some numbers that we've known in the past that have come in and were numbers that were bad. So if we wanted to add one, for instance, like international calling, we would say 011. And if we don't make any international calls, we would put this in here, and this is system-wide. The system configuration, anything that you make in here, any changes you modify, these are all system-wide. We have the option here, lock voicemail access password. With today's technology, there are bad people out there and are trying to get the capability to log into people's voicemails and make outbound calls from within voicemail. It is a very profitable business for them because they sell the calling minutes, phone numbers for $1, and they use your system to make calls to the Philippines, to India, to other countries, and they're using your phone system unbeknownst to you. So it's very important that you keep an eye on the security of the voicemails, and that's why passwords have to be very secure. They cannot be digits that are consecutive. They cannot have anything in them that are related to the extension. So you have to be aware of that, and that is something that the system can help you protect. And so basically it's saying after 8 false passwords for voicemail, lock it for 1 hour. You can modify that. You can make it for longer, or you could just make it shorter. It's up to you. Trunk call restriction. If you wanted to block all outgoing calls, you would put a check mark in here, and then the option #38 would block all outgoing calls. I don't know of any instance when we've needed this, but it's good to just know this. Allow E1, T1, PRI, tie trunk to hop off. If we enable this, this allows multiple systems to be able to make local calls off of each other. So for instance, if you have a phone system in New Jersey and you have a phone system in California, If the phone system in California had local lines connected to it, by enabling that check mark, you could actually connect to the phone system in California and make local calls to California rather than making them from here. I don't know how much of an issue that is today with the lines having flat fee calling for local and long distance. However, if you do have international companies that you're working with that has a system like this, you can make international calls off of their phone system rather than make an international call through the phone lines and the phone provider. So that could save a lot of money there. So you can also restrict this specific capability to just an extension or a group of people. This trunk access 10-digit dialing lists area codes for areas that do not require dialing a 1 before the area code. So you can add this if you have specific restrictions on your T1 or PRI lines from your phone provider. This is how you address those particular needs, because sometimes the restrictions that the call system, the call provider might have, like a Verizon or a Broadview or AT&T, they may result or be an issue for the phone system. So in this case, this phone system has a lot of flexibility in what it allows you to do. So let's go over to feature profiles. So one of the things about the phone system is that it has a lot of features. And one of the things that we've seen is that sometimes the users take advantage of some of the features. For example, do not disturb. An employee might enable do not disturb if they're in a call group, and then no calls would go to them, and they ask their supervisor, who may not be monitoring what they're doing. Their supervisor might not know that they've got themselves on do not disturb. And so what this screen here allows you to do is allows you to create profiles, and you can then assign these profiles to specific extensions that you may not want to have all of these different features available. So you have system is 0, which has no restrictions. This is everything. And then you have restricted. So you may not want them to change their personal options. You may not want them to use hands-free mode, dial tone disable mode. You might take away the do not disturb option, language settings, outside call blocking, operator offline, overhead paging. You can take a lot of these out. And then once you apply these to when you set up an extension, you can apply these particular profiles to them. And once you do that, they really have no capabilities that are unchecked. And so that makes it pretty easy for you to be able to keep track of what they're doing or take away some of the capabilities. Activities. In here, if you wanted to see what are the people doing, if they're going to the bathroom, if they're on away, if they are, if they're in a meeting, these activities have the options for different voicemail greetings. So, for instance, by you setting these up in here, these will become available for every user to record messages for. So, if they were in a meeting, they can record, "Hey, I'm in a meeting right now. Thanks for calling. Please leave a message. I'll call you back as soon as I'm done." They might be away from their desk. Maybe they stepped out for lunch. They might be on a vacation, or they may be out, or they might be on business travel. So not everyone wants all these capabilities, but it's nice to know that you have them if you wanted to run your business that way, where you wanted to have multiple options for people to leave voicemails. This would be where you would set up the different options that your company has. Audio peripheral is if you wanted to play on-hold music and you wanted to play it off of an external device, you can select the option code here and what board it's connected to. So anytime somebody is placed on hold or is being parked or is in queue, they could listen to music in there. Or you can also have a file that's connected to a particular board. These are prompts that play when somebody's in queue, and that might be, thank you for waiting. Someone will be with you in a few minutes. We appreciate your business, et cetera, et cetera. Play the update prompt every 60 seconds. So if you wanted that, this would be where you would specify if nobody's picked up after 60 seconds. There's a reminder, but it's not the same phrase as the one before. We apologize. As an example, we apologize that you're still on hold. Someone will be right with you. Please wait, and we'll get to the phone as soon as possible. So that's where this comes in. If you wanted to enable overhead paging and you had the proper equipment, this would be where you would add the check mark to enable audio overhead paging, and that would give you, if you have a warehouse or multiple buildings, even remote buildings, you would be able to do paging over there. Country relevant, this is where you are specifying what is your country's emergency phone numbers, what do you need to dial to get a local call, domestic, international calls would be 011, and if you have other emergency numbers. So this is just specific to the country that you're in. Call reports. This is where, if you wanted to, all of the call logs can be exported. You can add additional exporting capabilities. There are modules that are available to export all of the information, and by exporting, this will give you the capability to review calls, look at logs, see who's doing what work, and this is a very valuable tool. If you wanted to enable the internal logging service, which is what we have here, you can then just put a check mark in here, and then on the internal database configuration, you specify how long you want to retain that information. So right now we have it set for 12 months. By default, it goes to 3 months. And then you can also put an archive purge record, so 3 months per archive file. So after the 12-month period is done, it will archive every 3 months separately. And then if you had accounting data you wanted to process, you can enable that here. Account codes. Account codes are where you, if you wanted to, you could assign a code to a particular user. And this could be what they dial to allow them to make calls. So if you wanted to restrict every phone being able to make a call, you can assign an account code, and the account code could then restrict people from just being able to walk up to the phone and dial out. You could add a code for everyone, and that would be the code that they're using, and then you can report on that code to see how many calls and from where that account is being made. Another way to use this is if you were in a law firm or working on a case or working with a client and you wanted to track how much time you're dedicating to a particular account, you can add an account code for a client, and when you're making that account code addition, that will show up in the reports, and this way you can keep track of how much time you're spending with a particular client. So again, in the legal field, this is something that they've done, and you could add this or not based on what you want to do. So that ends our system configuration overview, and what we're going to do is we'll go to the next tab, which is soft switch component. Now this really only ties in if you have multiple systems. This is not really something that you would go into, so we're just going to skip this. We're really just looking at what would be the most important factors for you to be able to go in here as an administrator. If we look at the voicemail configuration, this is a system-wide options. And so what we have here is for the voicemail messages, message notification, there is the option for every extension, which you'll see shortly, that if somebody leaves a message and they enable, this is something they would be able to enable, they enable message notification, the phone system will actually get in touch with them via the phone, and it will try to let them know that they have a voicemail. And once the system gets them on the phone, that will allow them to listen to the actual call and then be able to know that the message is there, plus listen to it, and they can call back if they want to or if they have the right to. So what this is saying here is maximum retry count 0. We don't need to retry, but you could set it for, let's say, 2 times or 3 times to retry, and the retry interval in minutes. How often between the retries do you want them to make the call? So for instance, if my cell phone, let's say, is in an area that I don't have a good signal, maybe I want to try it every half hour if I haven't been able to get a hold of them. But in this case, we're not really trying. We're just trying one time and notifying them, and that's it. But you can make multiples, and you can set the interval. Message management options, confirm message deletion. So by default, if you enable this here, when anyone is listening to voicemail and they want to delete the message, it will prompt them and ask them, press 1 to confirm message deletion. If you don't do that, it will just delete the message, and sometimes that might be by mistake, and so we just want to avoid that. And then the other option that's checked is warrant expiration of saved messages. You have the option based on size and the length of when messages are going to expire in the voicemail that are saved, and the system will let them know as they get closer to it that their messages are about to expire. Next options here, recording options, minimum recording length. So basically what would happen here is the minimum recording length would be 0 seconds. You might want to say if somebody's going to leave a message and it's going to be less than 3 seconds, it's not really something that you want to have the system record. We, on the other hand, just have it at 0. You might be different, so it's up to you what you decide. And then the pause length is if there's a delay or a pause, there's nothing, no signal, no voice being heard on the phone system would then disconnect the voicemail or believe that it's over. And if you had Microsoft Exchange integrated and you wanted to integrate Microsoft Exchange, you have the capability to do this. This is an add-on. This is not part of the system natively, but it does give you the capability to have a voicemail synchronized with your email so that you have the option to be able to get your voicemail messages via email. Now this is very nice. Not 100% necessary unless you really want everyone to use the Exchange. The mailbox, the SMTP POP3 options, the phone system comes with its own built-in mail server, and so it does have the capability to take a copy of the messages if you wanted to, and it will forward them to your email. And so that is something that we use. Sometimes I want to get a copy of my voicemail in an email format in case I'm not by a phone. If I want to listen to it via email, I can do that from my computer by getting a copy of it. So that is also an option. Voicemail distribution list. So in this particular case, what we have is we have the capability to do what's called distribution lists. Let's say you have managers in the office and you want the owner of the company to record a message and just send it out to the managers in the company. That would be a distribution list that you would create, and that distribution list would essentially be managers. And then you would add all of the people that would fall in line with who it was that belonged to the managers group. When the president of the company would call up and leave a voicemail message, then the person that is leaving the message will have an option to send the distribution list, to send the voicemail to a particular distribution list. And in this case, it would be 00, whatever the ID is that you provide. So you do have the option to send it company-wide. You have the option to send it to just a group of people by creating a distribution list. Okay, let's go to AA configuration. Now, AA configuration is where the auto attendants come into play. Auto attendant is where you have the capability to assign what happens when the call comes in to your office, whether it's during business hours or whether it's during closed hours. Or you might have different companies, and if you have different companies or different groups, you can have different auto attendants as well. The system has the capability to have 255 auto attendants. Within each one of these auto attendants, what happens is you have the capability to also go down 16 levels. So let's take a look at what we have here. If we click on one that we've already created, or we can create a brand new one by highlighting it and clicking Edit. In this case, we'll just click on Edit for the open. So in our particular auto attendant, we record every single call. So the first thing that you see here is 0, 1 through 9, 0, star, pound, and T for timeout. So our first level says that when somebody calls our office, we're going to play prompt, which is a phrase 0105. In our particular case, it says, thank you for calling Baroan Technologies. Please note all calls are being recorded and may be used for customer service training or something else. So that's what we have, and then immediately after that, it also says if this is related to a help desk call, press 1. As you could see, when they press 1, it will go to the operator. In our case, the operator is the front desk, and that would be who is documenting any of the help desk tickets. And what we also have is if you do nothing, if you press 1 or just hold, if they just hold and do nothing, that would be a T for timeout. That will also go to the operator. So this is where you specify what happens when they dial a number. 2 could be if you know your party's extension and you want to dial, you could click on 2, press 2, and then in here you would select what actions happen. And that would be dial by name. And so they would have the option, dial by name, to start dialing the person's first name or last name, and then it would tell them who it is and then transfer them over. It might be that they don't know who they want and they want to listen to the directory. So the directory would be everyone's extension being played for them if they're part of the directory list, so that they can then determine who is the right contact. So you can have an open hours, closed hours, a holiday hours, and essentially it's all very similar. If you have any questions on this, we can go into it further, but the auto attendant is very powerful and gives you a lot of flexibility of how to use the phone system, and that's really the voicemail part of the system. So multilingual configuration, you can specify different languages that the phone system can use. So by default, we have the one language of English, but if you have Spanish or you have something else, you can say enable multilingual support, and then it will take you, based on the auto attendant that you want to enable here, you could ask what language they'd like to learn. So again, you do have the option for multilingual support, and then there's also feature code #12, all that has to do with multilingual support. So that's where that would be. Recording configuration. If you have centralized recording enabled, you have the capability to designate where the recording is going to go. In this case, we have extension-based recording, but we can just have trunk-based recording, which means that any lines that are being used, those all get recorded. We have extension-based recording, and then we're selecting which extensions are going to be recorded at all given time. These are the locations that the recordings are going to get saved to. And mind you, if you record every single call, you definitely will want to have a large repository for the voicemails. While they do a good job of keeping the file sizes low, this is something that you want to make sure you have enough space for so you don't run out of room when you are recording. The other options here is if you wanted to add these informations to FTP, if you wanted to send them off-site, this would be where you would enter that information, and then that would give you the capability to send those up there. Let's see, what else do we have here? Application extension configuration. This is a little bit more advanced if you wanted to have a specific application added where it's customized to your system, your company, that's where you would do. And redundancy is if you have another phone system and you wanted everything to switch over, it has the capability to do that as well. Let's look at the PBX information. So we looked at trunk configurations quickly earlier on for number 7 if we wanted to assign a dedicated line. But you have the capability to very, very granularly decide what happens when calls come in and what their phone numbers are. So you can see there's the trunk access code. What do I want to do? What do I want to assign if I want to grab that? A caller ID for that number. I can make one line outgoing only, incoming only, or both. I can make it for paging only, or I can make it for emergency 911 dialing also. If there's a pre-dialed trunk trunk pre-dial string, like 9, for instance, or if I have in the past there were 5-digit numbers that you would have to put in to get a special discount or to be routed over a discounted company, a discounted line. That would be something you can add in here on a per-line basis, which is very powerful. And enter the Centrix transfer. Again, if you have Centrix lines that you would put in, then that would be something you'd want to look at. For analog lines, you have holiday profiles and business hour profiles. So you have the capability, if this is a fax line, for instance, to make it a different profile for the holiday hours, because you don't want your fax lines to be going to the auto attendant, for instance, on a day when the office is closed. Maybe there's an important fax that comes in. So you want to designate lines to be different if they are always going to be needed, whether there's a holiday or not. And then your main phone lines would be different so that on holiday times you can specify what happens to them. You can also put a line in service or out of service. If you put it out of service, the phone system will not even look at it to try to use it for anything. In-call routing, this would be what do we want to happen to this particular line that we have highlighted right now during work hours. So during work hours, we're going to go to our open, okay, during business hours. Non-work days, what we're going to do is, work days outside of business hours, it's going to go to our closed hours. And on days when we're not open, we're going to go to the closed hours. Now, the nice thing about this is that if you wanted to make a change to all of the similar lines, in this case, all of the loop start lines, if I modify this, let's just say we go back over here to open, I could select apply to, and that would make that change to all of the lines. So rather than me making a change to every single line on its own, I just click on apply to and then select all of the lines that I'm able to make that call to. And then out call blocking. This is where if you have, let's say, a cleaning service or you are in a building with shared office space, you could specify that after a certain hour, no one can make calls outside the office, and this protects you, and this is where you would specify that. So for all of these lines, somebody comes over and they pick up a line, and they try to make an outgoing call at a certain time, they will not be able to. Okay. Let's go to in-call routing. So in-call routing, this is where you specify private lines or you specify specific calls that are important to you and where they should go. So as you can see, we have, let's look at our main number here, 0404. So the last 4 digits. So when the 4 digits come over on our caller ID, we then specify during business hours what happens, where they go. They go to open. Outside of business hours, they go to our closed hours auto attendant. And on non-work days, they go over to our closed hours. As you can see, the holiday profile business hours, they're under system. If I look at fax lines, for instance, the fax line is going to go to extension 404. That is an extension that we have a fax system connected to, a fax machine. Same thing, it doesn't matter when it comes in. I want it to go to extension 404. I have a holiday profile for fax lines. That means that there are no holidays for the fax lines, and the business hours are whatever they are, which is the system. So it doesn't make a difference because this is where all of my business hours, it's going to the same place. Caller ID, in the event that I have anyone that calls in from a specific phone number, I can reject the call if it's if it's an unwanted fax. These are numbers that I have based on caller ID, or if it is any particular call that I want from a client, I can go in and I can say when my client calls in, I want it to go to a specific department or a specific group or a specific person. And that is how the caller ID routing works. Okay, let's close out of here. Outcall routing, we've already gone through outcall routing. Again, this is where we manipulate the lines based on the phone calls that we're making. and it's very powerful for us. One of the things, let me just go back in here. One of the things that I'd like to show is if we had, let's say, cable lines, or we had lines where there was a flat fee per month for each line, that would be where we would want all the calls to go over first. So we might have 3 lines, let's say, from cable, and they charge $30 per month. Well, during those calls, it doesn't matter who we call anywhere in the local or long distance in the U.S., that will be where the calls are going to go. And we can specify that we want the first calls to always be over those lines. And that makes it cost effective for us because those calls don't cost more than what they would. They would be less than the other lines. And so we would only use the other lines in the event that those were not available. Okay, extension configuration. This is probably the most time that you're going to spend is going to be in here. And this is where you set up an extension for the users. And the nice thing about this phone system and the power of it is that every user has specific capabilities that can be enabled and disabled. And so that's what makes it pretty powerful. So let's look at my extension. I would put in my first name, my last name, my voicemail password, description if I want to, DID number. So if I wanted to have a direct number, we have a list with the PRI company of phone numbers that are assigned to us. I can just put in the last 4 digits of a direct number, and if I wanted to give that direct number out to people so they just bypass everything and they go right to me, that would be what I would put in here, and when somebody dialed that number, it would ring right at my phone. My default language, the caller ID when I'm dialing from my phone, this is what I want it to send out, and the feature profile, if I was restricted, then I would just select restricted, but I'm not restricted, so I'm under system. And E911 caller ID, this would be a phone number ID that I would want to display if I'm calling 911. Now, the reason this is in place here is, let's say you have people that are working home remote with their IP phones. What would happen is if they picked up their home phone, or one of their kids picked up their home phones and dialed 911, it would be an extension off of the phone system here. And so the caller ID to the 911 call center would show up as 201-796-0404. So if they're home in a different state, that wouldn't really help them. And so you have the capability with the E911 to put in a phone number for their house for that extension. And so this is where this comes in. If I have my home extension, I want the caller ID to be my home phone number is what shows up if I pick up that IP phone to make that call. Otherwise, the police or the emergency services will not come there. In the time of an emergency, people don't usually think about what number to put in or what phone they're picking up, and so they may not realize that if they pick up an IP phone from work, it will dial the work's phone number as the caller ID. This is where I put in enable dial by name. If I wanted people to dial my name, if I made that as an option on my auto attendant, by enabling this here, they could find my extension by dialing my first name or my last name. Some of the owners of the companies may not want this, or you may want to have a conference room phone or a phone in the kitchen, and so you may not want that enabled, and so you would just simply uncheck this. Enable intercom. This would allow people to be able to intercom via my phone to contact me, or if I was an agent in the system and we had call center features, this would be where that would go. If I had account codes that we talked about earlier and I wanted to enforce them, I would be able to put a check mark here for this extension and then all of the other options here. Call recording. I want to make sure that my extension is being recorded, so I have the option to record to the central location. Recording tone, some companies may require that if you're recording another party that you add the tones for recording. I can enable that or disable that. And in this case, we're disabling it because we make the announcement when calls come in that all calls are recorded. If it's a physical extension where I have a physical analog line, it would be a physical extension with the phone. Or if it's a virtual extension where I'm using a soft phone software, or it's a virtual extension and I don't really have hard equipment, I just have the numbers being forwarded to my mobile phone. That's what determines this. Or if it's an IP extension, which is what I have here. If it's an IP extension, I can enable IP. A lot of these you don't have to worry about because the company that we will actually set them up for you based on what you need. And then the phone display, on every phone that we have here, you have 2 lines, top and bottom, that come over. You can designate for each extension, again, another reason why this is so powerful, of what displays. So on the top line, it will be the caller number. On the name line 1, it'll be the DNIS number. The DNIS number is the number that they dialed in. So where this comes into play for you is if you are answering calls from multiple companies, you can select the DNIS number, meaning that you could see what number they dialed, so you could pick up the phone based on that person's number that they called in. It might be, thank you for calling Baroan Technologies. It might be, thank you for calling Company B. And the way you would know that phone number is because on the calls that come in, you'll see which number they dialed. So you can have the DNIS name number right now, which is what we have. You can also specify a specific name. So if there's a name associated with that number, then that's what would come over, so that the people answering the phones would know who is calling for what company. So that's also very powerful. Group is what work groups or hunt groups that they belong to. Under here, you have allow wrap-up time. So once they're finished with the call, if they're in a hunt group, there's the capability for the phone system to forward the calls to the agents that are in there. And then you have the option here, if they're just you're giving them an allowing them 2 or 3 minutes to be able to wrap up the call and type up whatever missing notes they have before they get the call. That might be something that you want to do. You can do that in here. And some of the other options allow pickup call from workgroup queue. So if they are done with their call and they're ready, they could see the queue in the workgroup. Again, you have to have the call center capabilities, and then they could take whatever call they want based on how long they're in there. Speed dialing, everyone gets 20 speed dials that are personal to them, and they can add them in there. And once they're added in there, they then become available for them from their extension, no matter where their extension is. Mailbox management, this is where you specify that this is an information-only mailbox. You could disable the mailbox for this extension, or you could assign exchange integration licenses for this. This is where my mailbox settings, if I wanted, my mailbox name is Guy. If I wanted to retrieve voicemail by email client, I would put a check mark here. And over here, as you can see, I have all of my voicemail messages going to get forwarded to my voicemail, to my email via the capability of the system to send these out. And then I have the option that says that once they get mailed out, what do I want to do with the message on my phone? I have it, keep it as new, but I could also delete it, or I could keep it as saved. These message playback options, announce message sender before playback, announce timestamp before playback, confirm callback number. All of these could be enabled or disabled. It's up to you. This is just a preference of what happens with the voicemail. They'll tell you who they are, when they called, and you can have distinctive ring, play the newest voicemail message first, so the newest will be on top rather than the oldest in the box. At any given time, when anybody presses 0 while they're in my voicemail, I have the option to forward it to the operator, forward it to voicemail if I wanted to, go to the auto attendant. So I have complete control over what happens with that call. And then I also have how many messages do I allow the person to keep in their voicemail, what's my maximum mailbox size, how long is the maximum message someone can leave me. In this case, I have 5 minutes. You can change that to whatever you want it to be. And how long do I want the messages to be saved? I have it for 60 days. Notification, if I do get any kind of voicemails and I want to know, I want all voicemails. I want notification for all voicemails. And basically, I want the system, once I have a voicemail, to contact me on my phone, but it can also do a pager or an extension or a custom app. And my phone number is right here, so it will dial me. And then I don't want it to wait a certain amount of time before, but if I wanted to wait a certain amount of time, it will wait for me before it sends out the info. And then I have a schedule. Do I want it non-business hours only? Do I want it from a certain time to a certain time, or do I want it at any time? Do I really want to know if somebody's leaving me a voicemail message at 3 in the morning? I don't, but you may. And if you do, it would be any time. Or if it's only from a certain time period, this is what you would select. Restrictions. This is where you can restrict individual extensions, what they can do. So very important, you don't want to have no restrictions on out calls for everyone, because you might have a kitchen phone. You don't want people calling international numbers on. So if you're not restricting international numbers for the whole company, you may want to do it here. You may want to say this phone is only allowed to call internal people. Receiving calls is not a problem. It's who you're calling. You have the option internal, local, and unrestricted calls, or allow internal, local, unrestricted, and defined prefixes. So if we have defined prefixes, these are ones that are allowed. And where this comes in play is, let's say you have a warehouse and you have people in the back and they want to call their home. So they might live in a different area code, like 908. So if I put 908 in here, that would be a number. Anything that starts with 908, that would allow the people to dial a 908 number. So it would really be 1908. If I know I have people in South Jersey, it would be 1732. You can allow the prefixes. And then the other option here is, if you don't allow this, it is allow all calls except the defined prefixes. So these are ones that are not allowed. So I'm going to say that I don't want this particular extension to dial international. So any calls that I have that are not restricted on the overall system, I can put them in here. If I didn't have international, I can put it in here, and other ones that I may want to use. So you have very capable lockdown information items per extension. The other option here is other call restrictions. So allow calls to be transferred or conferenced to an outside number. This is if you want to bring in a conference call from somebody who's outside the office. This has to be enabled. If I want to allow the extension user to configure forwarding, notification, and reminder calls to an outside number, this has to be enabled. If I want to allow outside caller to make or return calls from within voicemail. So if I'm listening to my voicemail because the system contacted me and I want to return the phone call, if I put a check mark here, it will give me the option, dial 5 to call the person back. Maybe I'm driving. I don't have the person's phone number. So by having that option, I can dial 5 on my phone. The phone system will grab the caller ID and dial that person back and connect us. And then allow outside caller to make or forward international calls from within voicemail. Very tricky. You don't want to enable this if they don't need international calls. And this was added because many companies did not have the control over international calls, and people were able to hack into systems that didn't have the right passwords on their systems and then make calls. So very important to make sure that you understand all of these capabilities, and you want to minimize what you're allowing. Answering. In here, this is how I control what happens with my phone. So if I'm a virtual extension and I don't actually reside in the office, I can enable all calls to get forwarded to my voicemail, an extension, outside number, maybe my outside extension. Busy call handling. What do I want the system to do if I'm busy? If I'm on the phone with someone else? Do I want it to go to voicemail, which is what I have here? Do I want to place the caller in queue, and then it'll show up for me while I'm using the system? Or do I want it to just go to an auto attendant, and it might be to whatever auto attendants we have defined? Do I want it to go to a park line, maybe a park line system that somebody else can pick up? Or do I want to forward it to somebody else's extension? So this is what do I want the system to do if I'm on the phone. There's also call waiting options. Enable single call waiting, very similar to your home, where if you have somebody else on the phone, you'll hear a tone in your ear. You can switch back and forth between the calls. Enable multiple call waiting. This is if you want to enable more than one person to be able to speak with you while you're on the phone. It's kind of like having your own call center. You can certainly do that, and it will allow you to go back and forth between all of the calls. and enable live call handling. The only difference between enable live call handling and enable multiple call waiting is enable multiple call waiting. If you happen to be in voicemail checking messages, it will go to voicemail. If you happen to be in voicemail with enable live call handling enabled, you will know somebody's on the phone and they'll give you the option to get out of voicemail and get on that call. This is where you enable do not disturb. You could do it on your own or you could do it from the phone. And if you don't have that option, if you're restricted, this will be grayed out. The no answer call handling. This is what do I want the system to do if I do not answer the phone? And after how many rings do I want it to do? So if I want it to ring 4 times before it goes to another action, this is where I define what that action is. So I could either forward the call. If I don't pick up after 4 rings, I can forward it to somebody else. I can send it to my voicemail. I can forward it to an auto attendant. I can forward it to a line park. Or I can enable what's called one number access. If you remember that ONA, this is where we define this. So if I have this checkbox marked, I have another tab that's available for me. And the option is, when do I want to enable this? Anytime, business hours only, non-business hours, or based on the schedule. So one number access is where the phone system can try to find you. And I can enable it based on call screening. And the call screening allows me to basically say to the people that I want them to tell me, to record who they are before the phone system would actually get out there and try to get me. So it will record their name, and then once it has all of the defined information, it'll call me. And then if I want to talk to them, I would pick up the phone knowing who they are. If I don't want to talk to them, I would send them back to voicemail. So I can do this by a particular schedule, but because I have it at any time, see where it says based on schedule, if I do that, it enables when do I want this to be enabled for me. I only want it from 6 to 9 p.m. I'm going to change that, and I'm going to say from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. And I could also do it based on caller ID. Do I want it for my wife, top client, one of our employees? I can enable caller ID, and only when one of these caller IDs show up will that work. Then I have it forward to an outside number, dial 8 for an outside line, and then this is my cell phone. So when my cell phone rings from the office, it will check the password, okay, and it'll ask for my voicemail password before it transfers the call. That's what that check mark means in here. And it will ring for 20 seconds. After 20 seconds, it will go back and tell the person I could not find them, or if it does find them, it will say I'm connecting you. I found the person and I'm now connecting you. So that's all enabled by enable one number access in there. Okay. And the monitor list is if I wanted to monitor specific individuals within the company, what they're doing on the phone, I have the capability to see that from the software application, which we will probably not get into at this training, but we will get to at a subsequent training. So that was the extension configuration. Probably, like I said, the place you'll spend the most time. Altigen IP phone configuration. This is where you can specify what the buttons mean on the phones themselves. You can push down firmware. You can set settings in here. This would probably be something that Baroan Technologies would help you with, so probably not something that you'll spend time in. Hunt group configuration. This is where you could specify hunt groups. In this case, I'm going to delete them here. Let's just do a test hunt group number, which would be, let's say, 509. And global means it's available for everyone. So 509, I can add members to the work group. I can give it a name. You know, this is a test hunt group. And the hunt group essentially is, let's say, an operator work group where you want, when a phone call comes in, it's the, let's say, customer service department. You could specify who is in that customer service department, Call handling, you can say ring the first available member in that group. You can say ring the next available member or ring them all at the same time. So you can define groups in here that are related to what your needs are. And this is basically what would happen if you wanted to have multiple people get a phone call at the same time. Paging group configuration. This is from a paging perspective, how you want to be able to get in touch with everyone. The paging group really has to do with the hands-free, with the paging through the phones. Line park configuration. So you can specify line parks. So whether it's a system line park, you can specify maybe a few buttons that go to the system so that everyone can see those numbers or those calls parked, and then specific to what you want to do with them. So this is where you would configure those line parks that we were looking at prior, and then you would make that available on some of the buttons on the phones. So if somebody calls in and they want to have a call with John, and John is in the warehouse, you would park them on one of those lines, which would then light up or flash on John's line as well as everybody else's line where that line park button is enabled. And then John would go to the phone and press that line, and he would pick up whoever it was that was parked. So again, very powerful. Meet Me conference extension. So we're not going to go into this fully right now, but this does give you the capability to have those webinar type conferences where you have multiple people that dial into a meeting that you set up. Rather than you conferencing them in, you give them an extension or a phone number, and the phone number goes right into the meeting group. This ties in with Outlook and can send all the information out to your client. But this phone system comes built in with up to 12 people to have in a call at one time for a Meet Me conference. So very powerful. Instead of paying for services, you could do that on your own. Call center. This is really related to the call center itself if you needed to have any access to a little bit more capabilities than what a hunt group does. This is where you can have skill-based routing, and you can look at the queue management. It gives you all these different options specific to what do you want to have the phone system do if people are on the phone, how you want them to get routed. It's very powerful, very simple, and yet powerful at the same time if you wanted to have more control over what's going on. So essentially, that was a lot of information that we went over. That is pretty much the majority of the places you will go within the MaxAdministrator. We'll call the Altigen Administrator screen, and that will wrap up the training for the Administrator section. And that's it. Have a wonderful day. And what we're going to do is we're going to exit out of here. One more piece. Never shut down all services. That will actually shut down your phone system. You could also log out, or you could just exit out. But if you shut all the services, that will kick you out. Okay, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for attending.